I stopped drilling the moment I saw them. 3 perfect footprints, human-shaped and unmistakable, preserved in ice that our carbon dating confirmed was over 12,000 years old. They were not on the surface where someone could have walked yesterday or last week. They were inside the glacier, 20 feet deep, visible through the clear blue ice like insects trapped in amber. But here is what made my hands shake as I held the drill. The footprints were facing downward. Whoever made them had been walking on the underside of the ice, upside down, as if gravity meant nothing at all. My name is Owen, and I am 27 years old. Before I tell you what happened at the Mendenhall Glacier Research Camp in Alaska, I need you to understand that I am not someone who believes in ghosts or spirits or anything that cannot be explained by science. I have a degree in glaciology from the University of Colorado, and I have spent the last 4 years studying ice cores, measuring glacial retreat, and documenting climate patterns. I deal in facts, in data, in things I can measure and prove. But what I experienced during those 3 weeks in October changed everything I thought I knew about the world. If you have ever had something happen that you could not explain, something that made you question reality itself, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes, sharing these experiences helps us understand that we are not alone in confronting the unexplainable. The research camp was small, just 4 temporary structures set up on the eastern edge of the Mendenhall Glacier, about 15 miles from Juneau. Our team consisted of 6 people. There was Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the lead researcher, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a no-nonsense attitude. There was James, our equipment specialist, a quiet man in his early 40s who could fix anything with duct tape and patience. There was Rebecca, a graduate student like me, 25 years old with red hair and a constant smile. There was Thomas, our logistics coordinator, a former park ranger in his 30s who knew the Alaskan wilderness better than anyone. And there was Angela, our data analyst, a soft-spoken woman in her late 20s who rarely left her computer screen. We arrived at the camp on October 3rd, flying in by helicopter with 3 months' worth of supplies. The plan was simple. We would drill ice cores at various depths, collect samples, and document the rate of glacial melt. It was routine work, the kind of research I had done a dozen times before. The helicopter dropped us off in the early morning, the rotors kicking up snow and ice as we unloaded our equipment. The pilot, a weathered man named Carl, gave us a final wave before lifting off, promising to return in 3 weeks for the extraction. The camp itself was utilitarian. 4 insulated structures connected by covered walkways. The main building housed our laboratory equipment, computers, and communication systems. The second building was our sleeping quarters, with 6 small bunks separated by thin curtains. The third was the kitchen and common area, where we took our meals and held our evening briefings. The fourth was storage, packed with fuel, food, and emergency supplies. The first 3 days passed without incident. We established our drilling sites, set up the equipment, and began extracting our first cores. The weather was cold but manageable, with temperatures hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and dropping to near 0 at night. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, alien way. Endless white in every direction, broken only by the blue-gray ice of the glacier and the dark peaks of distant mountains. It was on the 4th day, October 7th, that I made the discovery. I was working at drilling site 3, about half a mile from the main camp. The site was positioned over a section of the glacier where the ice was exceptionally clear, almost like looking through blue glass. I had already extracted 2 cores from shallower depths, and I was setting up for a deeper drilling when I noticed something strange in the ice below me. At first, I thought it was a shadow, some trick of the light refracting through the frozen layers. But as I brushed away the surface snow and peered closer, I realized I was looking at something that should not have been there. Footprints. 3 of them, perfectly preserved, each one showing the clear outline of a human foot. They were bare feet, not boots or shoes, and they were spaced as if someone had been walking. But they were inside the ice, and they were upside down. I called Dr. Hartwell on the radio immediately. My voice must have conveyed my shock because she arrived within 15 minutes, slightly out of breath from the fast walk across the glacier. James and Rebecca came with her, carrying additional equipment. "Show me," Dr. Hartwell said, her breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. I pointed down through the ice. All four of us knelt on the frozen surface, staring at the impossible sight below us. The footprints were clearly visible, about 20 feet deep, preserved in ice that was so clear we could see every detail. The toes, the arch of the foot, even what looked like the texture of skin. "Could it be a natural formation?" Rebecca asked, her voice uncertain. "Some kind of pressure pattern or melt anomaly?" James shook his head slowly. "Those are footprints. There is no question about it." Dr. Hartwell pulled out a measuring tape and began documenting the dimensions. Each print is approximately 11 inches long, adult human size. The depth suggests they have been here for thousands of years. She paused, looking up at us with an expression I had never seen on her face before: uncertainty. "But that is impossible. Humans did not reach this region until roughly 14,000 years ago, and even then, they would not have been walking on a glacier, and certainly not underneath one. Maybe there is a cave system below," I suggested, trying to find a rational explanation. "Maybe someone fell through a crevasse, and the ice shifted over time, rotating the prints." Dr. Hartwell nodded slowly, but I could see she did not believe it. None of us did. The footprints were too perfect, too deliberate. They looked like someone had been walking with purpose, not falling or struggling. We spent the rest of the day documenting the discovery. We took photographs from every angle, ran preliminary scans with our ground-penetrating radar, and extracted an ice core from just beside the footprints. The core confirmed what our instruments had already told us. The ice was approximately 12,300 years old, give or take a few centuries. That night, back at camp, we sat in the common area discussing what we had found. Thomas, who had been out checking our supply lines during the day, listened to our description with a troubled expression. "The Tlingit people have stories," he said quietly. "Stories about things that live in the ice. They call them the upside-down walkers. Spirits that exist between our world and another, walking on the underside of reality." Dr. Hartwell waved a hand dismissively. "Thomas, we are scientists. We deal in observable phenomena, not folklore." "I know," Thomas replied. "But maybe folklore exists for a reason. Maybe people have been seeing things like this for a long time and trying to explain them the only way they could." The conversation made me uncomfortable, so I excused myself and went to bed early. But sleep did not come easily. I kept thinking about those footprints, about what kind of person or thing could have made them, and I kept thinking about Thomas's words. The upside-down walkers. The next morning, October 8th, Rebecca did not come to breakfast. We knocked on her bunk partition, calling her name, but there was no response. When Angela finally pulled back the curtain, we found Rebecca's bed empty, her sleeping bag unzipped and thrown aside. Her boots were gone, but her coat was still hanging on the hook beside her bed. "She must have gone out," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nobody went outside without their coat, not in this weather." We searched the camp thoroughly, checking every building, every storage area, every possible place someone could be. Rebecca was nowhere. Dr. Hartwell tried raising her on the radio, but there was only static. Thomas organized a search party immediately. He, James, and I geared up and headed out onto the glacier, following the only set of fresh footprints leading away from camp. The tracks were small, definitely Rebecca's boots, and they led in a straight line toward drilling site 3. We found her 2 hours later. She was standing on the ice directly above the footprints, staring down at them through the clear surface. She was not wearing her coat, despite the sub-zero temperature, and her arms hung limply at her sides. Her eyes were open, but she did not seem to see us. "Rebecca!" I shouted, running toward her. She did not respond. As I got closer, I could see that her lips were blue, her face pale with early frostbite. But she was alive, still breathing, still standing. Thomas reached her first, wrapping her in the emergency blanket he had brought. "Rebecca, can you hear me? What are you doing out here?" Her eyes slowly focused on his face. When she spoke, her voice was distant, dreamy. "They are walking," she said. "Can you hear them? They are walking underneath us." We got her back to camp as quickly as we could. Dr. Hartwell and Angela had prepared the warmest bunk, piling on extra blankets and starting a space heater. Rebecca's core temperature was dangerously low, 89 degrees Fahrenheit, just above the threshold for severe hypothermia. As we worked to warm her, she kept mumbling the same phrases over and over. Walking underneath, upside down. They want us to see them. They want us to understand. It took 6 hours for Rebecca to fully regain consciousness and coherence. When she did, she had no memory of leaving her bunk or walking out onto the glacier. The last thing she remembered was going to sleep after our evening discussion about the footprints. "I had dreams," she said, wrapped in 3 blankets and sipping hot tea. Dreams about walking on ice, but everything was reversed. The sky was below me, and the ice was above, and there were others with me, walking beside me. But when I tried to look at them, they were not quite there, like shadows, but shadows that moved on their own. Dr. Hartwell examined her thoroughly, checking for signs of concussion or neurological damage, but Rebecca appeared physically fine, except for the frostbite on her fingers and toes. "You are staying inside for the next 48 hours, Dr. Hartwell ordered. "No arguments. You nearly died out there." That night, Dr. Hartwell called an emergency meeting. We gathered in the common area, and she laid out the situation with her characteristic directness. "I do not know what is happening here," she said, "but we need to make a decision. Do we continue the research, or do we call for early extraction?" "We cannot leave," Angela said immediately. "This discovery, those footprints, they could rewrite everything we know about human migration patterns in North America. We would be abandoning the most significant archaeological find in decades." "If it is archaeological," James countered, "we do not know what those prints are or how they got there." "Exactly," Dr. Hartwell said, "which is why we need to investigate further, but only if everyone agrees to strict safety protocols. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We work in pairs at minimum, and we maintain constant radio contact." We all agreed, though I could see the hesitation on everyone's faces. If you are watching this and wondering why we did not just leave immediately, I want you to understand something about scientists. We are driven by curiosity, by the need to understand. Walking away from a mystery like this felt impossible, like a betrayal of everything we had dedicated our lives to studying. If you are enjoying this story so far, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing these experiences, and trust me, what happened next is something you will not want to miss. The following day, October 9th, we returned to drilling Site 3 with full equipment. Dr. Hartwell had devised a plan to extract a larger core sample that would include one of the footprints themselves. If we could get the actual print into our lab, we could run detailed analyses, potentially even extract organic material that might tell us more about what made it. The drilling took most of the day. We worked in shifts, 2 people operating the equipment while the others kept watch and managed the generator. By 4 p.m., as the weak October sun began its descent toward the horizon, we had successfully extracted a core that contained the edge of one footprint. We transported it back to camp in a specialized container, keeping it frozen to preserve any potential organic material. In the lab, under bright lights and with our best microscopes, we examined it closely. What we found defied explanation. The footprint was not pressed into the ice the way a normal footprint would be pressed into snow or mud. Instead, the ice itself had formed around the shape of a foot, as if the foot had been there first and the water had frozen around it. But there was no organic material, no skin cells, no DNA, just ice shaped exactly like a human foot. "It is as if someone made a mold," Angela said, peering through the microscope. "But there is no mold material, no casting agent, just the negative space where a foot should be." Dr. Hartwell ran a spectrographic analysis on the ice within the footprint versus the ice surrounding it. The results showed a slight but measurable difference in the molecular structure. The ice inside the footprint had a higher concentration of deuterium, heavy water, which made no sense given that it was part of the same glacial formation. "This is not natural," Dr. Hartwell said finally, sitting back from the computer screen. "I do not know what it is, but it is not a natural geological formation." That night, the dreams started for all of us. I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps above me. Not inside the building, but literally above me, on the ceiling. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. I lay in my bunk, frozen with fear, listening to the impossible sound. After several minutes, I found the courage to turn on my flashlight and shine it at the ceiling. There was nothing there, just the white panels of the insulated roof. But the footsteps continued, now moving down the wall beside me, defying every law of physics. I heard a gasp from nearby. Angela was awake too, sitting up in her bunk, staring at the same wall where I had heard the footsteps descending. "You hear it too?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide in the dim light. The footsteps reached the floor and then seemed to continue downward, fading as if someone was walking down through the foundation of the building into the ice below. In the morning, we discovered that everyone had experienced something similar. Dr. Hartwell had heard voices speaking in a language she did not recognize. James had seen shadows moving across his ceiling. Thomas had felt someone sitting on the edge of his bunk, the mattress depressing under invisible weight. Rebecca, still recovering in her bunk, had spent the entire night with her eyes open, too terrified to sleep, convinced that someone was standing at the foot of her bed watching her. "We need to call for extraction," Thomas said over breakfast. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he held his coffee mug. "This is beyond our scope. This is not research anymore. This is survival." But Dr. Hartwell shook her head. "We cannot get a helicopter in here for at least 3 days. The weather reports are showing a storm system moving in. We are stuck here regardless." She was right. By noon, the wind had picked up, and by 3 p.m., we were in a full whiteout. The storm raged around our camp, shaking the buildings and piling snow against the walls. We were completely cut off, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction. We spent the day inside, trying to maintain normalcy, but the tension was palpable. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, every shadow felt like a threat. We played cards, read books, did anything to keep our minds occupied. But the footprints were all we could think about. The footprints, and what they might mean. At 11 p.m., the power went out. The storm had not damaged our generator. James checked it thoroughly with a flashlight. It was running perfectly, fuel tank full, engine operating normally, but no power was reaching the buildings. It was as if something was blocking the flow of electricity. We gathered in the common area with battery-powered lanterns. The 6 of us huddled together for psychological comfort as much as warmth. Outside, the storm howled and screamed, but inside, we could hear something else. That sound of footsteps, now coming from all directions. On the walls, on the ceiling, beneath the floor. Slow and methodical, walking in patterns that made no sense in our 3-dimensional world. "They are circling us," Rebecca whispered. She had finally left her bunk to join us, wrapped in multiple blankets. "Like predators, circling prey." "They are not predators," Angela said, though her voice was uncertain. "They are not alive. They cannot hurt us." But even as she said it, we all felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, but suddenly, as if someone had opened a door to the Arctic night. Our breath began to fog the air inside the heated building. Frost started forming on the inside of the windows, and then we saw them, shapes in the frost on the windows, handprints at first, appearing one by one on every window in the room, but not normal handprints. These were upside down, as if someone was pressing their hands against the glass from the inside, even though we were all sitting in the center of the room. The handprints multiplied, covering every surface. Then footprints appeared on the ceiling above us, visible as depressions in the frost that had formed on the panels. We watched in horror as the footprints moved across the ceiling, pacing back and forth directly over our heads. Dr. Hartwell stood up slowly, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "Show yourself," she said to the empty air. "If you are trying to communicate, show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in the frost on the largest window, a shape began to form. It started as abstract lines, but gradually became clearer. A figure, human-shaped but somehow wrong. It was drawn in profile, and it appeared to be walking, but the orientation was impossible to parse. It seemed to be walking on a surface that was both above and below it simultaneously, as if it existed in a space where up and down had no meaning. More figures appeared in the frost on other windows, a dozen of them, then 2 dozen, all walking in the same impossible orientation. Some appeared to be carrying things, bundles of some kind. Others seemed to be in groups, as if traveling together. "They are showing us something," Angela said, standing up to get a closer look. "This is not a haunting. This is a message." Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Do not get close to them." But Angela shook him off, approaching the window with the clearest image. She raised her hand, hesitating for just a moment, then touched the frost where one of the figures was drawn. The reaction was immediate and violent. Every window in the building shattered simultaneously, exploding inward in a spray of glass and ice. The lanterns went out all at once, and in the absolute darkness that followed, we heard breathing. Not our breathing, something else. Something that surrounded us on all sides, above and below. James found his flashlight first, clicking it on with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing something that made no sense. The room was full of people, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing and sitting and lying on every surface. On the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling. They were translucent, like images projected through ice, and they were all oriented in different directions, as if each one existed in its own personal gravity. They were not looking at us. They were going about their business, whatever that business was. Some seemed to be preparing food. Others were working on tools or skins. A few appeared to be sleeping. They were dressed in simple furs and skins, and their faces, when visible, were human but weathered, marked by lives lived in harsh conditions. "They are people," Dr. Hartwell breathed. "Ancient people. This is not supernatural. This is something else. Something we do not understand yet." As we watched, one of the figures, a woman holding a child, seemed to notice us. She turned slowly, her translucent face showing surprise. She said something we could not hear, and other figures began to turn toward us as well. And then, one by one, they started walking in our direction. "Out!" Thomas shouted. "Everyone out! Now!" We grabbed what we could and fled from the common area, running through the covered walkway to the sleeping quarters. Behind us, we could hear the sound of many feet walking, that same slow, methodical pace we had been hearing all night. We barricaded ourselves in the sleeping quarters, pushing bunks against the door. The 6 of us huddled together in the center of the room, flashlights pointed at every entrance, waiting for whatever was coming. But nothing came. The footsteps reached our door, and then stopped. We waited in silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, slowly, the temperature began to rise. The unnatural cold receded, and with it, the presence we had all felt. By dawn, when the storm had passed and weak sunlight filtered through the windows, everything was back to normal. The windows in the common area were not shattered. The frost was gone. The generator was powering the buildings again as if it had never stopped. If not for the fact that all 6 of us had experienced the exact same thing, I would have convinced myself it was a dream or a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. We held an emergency meeting as soon as we had all had breakfast and coffee. Dr. Hartwell, always the scientist, tried to find a rational explanation. "Mass hallucination," she suggested. "Caused by carbon monoxide poisoning, perhaps, or some contaminant in our water supply." But James had already checked the carbon monoxide detectors. They were functioning properly and showed no dangerous levels. Our water came from melted ice, purified through our filtration system, and showed no unusual contaminants when tested. "We all saw the same thing," Rebecca said. "That does not happen with hallucinations. Hallucinations are personal, unique to each individual, unless we are all being influenced by the same source," Angela said quietly. "What if those footprints are not just physical prints? What if they are some kind of marker, a point where 2 realities touch, and by studying them, by bringing them into our lab, we have created some kind of connection?" It sounded insane. All of it sounded insane, but it was the only explanation that made sense. "If any explanation could make sense in this situation, we are leaving," Dr. Hartwell said finally. "As soon as we can get a helicopter in here, we are evacuating this camp. Thomas, get on the radio and request immediate extraction." Thomas tried for 3 hours to reach anyone on the radio, but every frequency just returned static. Or worse, the sound of footsteps walking through the electromagnetic spectrum. We were trapped. That afternoon, I made a decision. While the others were occupied with various tasks, I suited up and headed back out to drilling site 3. I needed to see the footprints again, needed to understand what we had uncovered. I knew I was breaking Dr. Hartwell's rule about not going anywhere alone, but I was careful. I kept my radio on, and I planned to be back within an hour. The walk across the glacier was eerie in the bright sunlight. Everything looked normal, pristine white snow reflecting the pale sun, distant mountains standing like sentinels on the horizon. But I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that thousands of invisible eyes were tracking my every movement. When I reached drilling site 3, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. There were more footprints, not in the ice this time, but on the surface. Fresh prints in the snow, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all converging on the spot where we had drilled our core. They came from every direction, creating a chaotic web of tracks that circled our drilling equipment like a shrine. But here is what made my blood run cold. These footprints were also upside down. They were pressed into the snow from above, yes, but the shape was inverted, as if someone had been walking on their hands, or as if the feet themselves were on backward. I activated my radio. "Dr. Hartwell, you need to see this." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. More static, and underneath it, that sound of walking. I was about to try a third time when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I turned slowly, and there, standing about 50 yards away, was a figure. It was translucent, like the ones we had seen in the common area, but more solid somehow. I could make out details. An older man, dressed in furs, with a weathered face and deep-set eyes. He was standing on the surface of the ice, but his orientation was wrong. He was tilted at an impossible angle, as if standing on a slope that did not exist. He raised one hand, pointing at the ground beneath my feet, then at himself, then down at the ice. He was trying to tell me something. I knelt slowly, brushing away the snow to reveal the clear ice below. The 3 original footprints were still there, perfectly preserved, but now I could see more around them, footprints extending in both directions, creating a trail that led deeper into the glacier. The figure nodded, as if satisfied that I understood. Then he began to walk, his impossible stride carrying him across the ice at that same slow, methodical pace. He was heading toward the center of the glacier, toward the thickest, oldest ice. Without fully understanding why, I followed him. I know it was foolish. I know I should have gone back to camp, should have brought the others, but I felt compelled, drawn by something I could not name. This was why we had come here, I told myself, to discover, to understand. The figure led me for nearly a mile across the glacier, always staying about 50 yards ahead, occasionally turning to make sure I was still following. We were moving toward an area we had not surveyed yet, a region where the ice rose in irregular formations, creating a landscape of frozen waves and valleys. Finally, the figure stopped at the edge of a deep crevasse. He pointed down into the darkness, then looked at me one last time before fading from view like morning mist. I approached the crevasse carefully, testing each step to make sure the ice would hold my weight. The opening was about 6 feet across, with sheer walls dropping into shadow. I clicked on my flashlight and pointed it downward. The beam illuminated something impossible. About 30 feet down, the crevasse opened into a larger chamber, and in that chamber, frozen in perfectly clear ice, was an entire settlement. Dozens of structures made from what looked like bone and hide, arranged in a circular pattern. And surrounding these structures, also frozen in the ice, were people, hundreds of them, preserved in mid-action. Some appeared to be working, others seemed to be running, a few were holding children. They were all oriented in different directions, some right side up, some sideways, some completely inverted. It was as if gravity had simply stopped meaning anything, and they had all fallen in different directions simultaneously. This was not a burial site. This was a moment frozen in time, a catastrophic event captured and preserved for 12,000 years. I do not know how long I stood there, staring down into that frozen tomb, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. It might have been minutes or hours, but eventually, I became aware of a presence behind me. I turned to find all 5 of my team members standing a few yards away, their faces blank, their eyes focused on something I could not see. "Guys," I called out, "how did you find me?" They did not respond. They just stood there, swaying slightly in the cold wind, like puppets waiting for someone to pull their strings. "Guys, are you okay?" Rebecca was the first to move. She took a step forward, then another, walking directly toward the edge of the crevasse. She was not looking where she was going, her eyes still fixed on that invisible point in the distance. "Rebecca, stop!" I shouted, running toward her. I grabbed her arm just as she reached the edge, pulling her back from the drop. She blinked, her eyes suddenly focusing on me with confusion. "Owen? What are you doing out here? What am I doing out here?" The others were starting to move now too, all walking toward the crevasse like sleepwalkers. I had to physically restrain Thomas, wrapping my arms around him to keep him from stepping over the edge. "Wake up!" I shouted at all of them. "All of you, wake up!" One by one, they came back to themselves, confused and disoriented. Dr. Hartwell was the last, and when she finally focused on me, there was terror in her eyes. "They were in my head," she said, her voice shaking. I could feel them in my thoughts, trying to make me understand something, trying to make me join them. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now. Whatever is happening here, it is getting stronger." We started back toward camp, moving as quickly as we dared across the treacherous ice. But we had only gone a few hundred yards when the ice beneath our feet began to glow. It started as a faint blue luminescence, barely visible in the afternoon light. But it grew brighter rapidly, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. And with each pulse, we could see more of what lay beneath the surface. Footprints. Thousands upon thousands of them, creating a vast network that extended in every direction. And among the footprints, we could see shapes, bodies frozen in the ice, all oriented in that same impossible way, all preserved for millennia. The entire glacier was a graveyard. "What happened to them?" Angela whispered, staring down at the glowing ice beneath our feet. "I do not know," Dr. Hartwell said, "but I think they are trying to show us." The glow intensified, and suddenly we were not standing on a glacier anymore. We were standing in darkness, a darkness so complete it felt like we had gone blind. But we could hear things, voices speaking in that unknown language, children laughing, the sounds of daily life. Then, a noise like nothing I had ever heard before. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through our bodies, shaking us down to our bones. The voices around us changed from contentment to confusion, then to fear, then to screaming, and then nothing, just cold, the absolute, unforgiving cold of being frozen solid in an instant. We snapped back to reality, all 6 of us gasping for breath, our hearts racing. The ice beneath us had stopped glowing, but we could still feel the echoes of what we had just experienced. That was not a vision or a hallucination. That was a memory. We had experienced what those ancient people had experienced in their final moments. "They were not walking upside down," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice barely audible. "They were walking normally. But something happened, something that twisted space itself, that changed the orientation of gravity. And they were all frozen in that moment, preserved at the instant when the laws of physics stopped making sense." "What could do that?" James asked. "I have no idea," Dr. Hartwell admitted. "An electromagnetic event? Some kind of gravitational anomaly? Or something else? Something we do not have the science to understand yet?" We made it back to camp just as the sun was setting, painting the ice in shades of orange and purple. Inside, we immediately tried the radio again. This time, miraculously, we got through. The call was crackling and full of static, but we managed to convey our situation. The dispatcher on the other end said they would send a helicopter first thing in the morning, weather permitting. We spent that last night together in the common area, no one willing to be alone. We took turns keeping watch, though we did not know what we were watching for. The footsteps came and went throughout the night, sometimes close, sometimes distant. We could hear voices too, speaking in that ancient language, singing songs that had not been heard for 12,000 years. But they did not threaten us anymore. Instead, It felt almost like they were saying goodbye. At 6 a.m., just as the first light was touching the horizon, we heard the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. We packed only the essentials, leaving most of our equipment and all of our research behind. The ice core containing the footprint remained in the lab, still frozen, still impossible. As we boarded the helicopter, I took one last look at the glacier. In the early morning light, I could see them. Hundreds, maybe thousands of translucent figures standing on the ice, all watching us leave. They were oriented in every possible direction, existing in their own personal versions of reality, forever trapped in that moment when the world had turned upside down. The pilot noticed my expression. "You guys okay?" he asked over the intercom. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "Something like that," I replied. We never filed an official report about what we experienced. How could we? We had no proof, no evidence that anyone would believe. The few photographs we had taken showed nothing unusual, just ordinary glacier ice. The ice core we had extracted, when examined later in a proper laboratory, showed no anomalies. The footprint was still there, still impossible, but without the context of being on the glacier, it just looked like an interesting geological formation. The drilling site was abandoned. The camp was dismantled a month later by a different crew, people who reported nothing strange, no footsteps, no visions, no impossible figures walking on the underside of reality. But I know what we experienced. We all do. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear them. The upside-down walkers, pacing slowly through my dreams. They are not threatening. They are just there, existing in their frozen moment, trying to tell us something about what happened to them. I have spent the last 3 years researching everything I can find about gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic events, and ancient catastrophes. I have found hints, suggestions that what we experienced might not be unique. There are other reports, other stories of places where the laws of physics seem to bend, where the barrier between different orientations of reality grows thin. The scientific community calls it nonsense, of course. They say I am suffering from delayed trauma response, that the isolation and stress of the expedition caused a shared psychotic episode among our team. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that there are places in this world where reality is not as solid as we like to believe. Dr. Hartwell retired from field research 6 months after we returned. She teaches now, at a small college in Vermont, and she never speaks about what happened on the glacier. I tried calling her once, about a year ago, and she politely but firmly told me that she had moved on and suggested I do the same. James moved to New Mexico and took a job maintaining solar panels in the desert. He told me he needed to be somewhere warm, somewhere far from ice and snow. We email occasionally, short messages that never mention Alaska or glaciers or footprints. Rebecca completed her graduate degree but switched her focus from glaciology to climate modeling. She works entirely with computer simulations now, never setting foot on actual ice. She sent me a message last Christmas that simply said, "They still visit my dreams. Do they visit yours?" Thomas went back to working as a park ranger, but in Florida, in the Everglades, about as far from glaciers as you can get, while still working with nature. He told me once, over a phone call late at night, that he had gone back to the Tlingit elders and asked them more about the upside-down walkers. They had told him that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. Angela is the only one who continued pursuing the mystery. She took a position at a research institute that studies anomalous phenomena, though she does not advertise this fact. She calls me every few months with new theories, new possibilities. She thinks what happened on the glacier was a localized temporal spatial inversion, a bubble where the normal rules of physics temporarily collapsed. She thinks it might have been caused by a meteorite impact, or a massive seismic event, or something else we have not discovered yet. But none of these theories explain the most troubling part. The figures we saw were not just preserved moments from the past. They were aware. They saw us. They tried to communicate with us. And in those final hours before we left, I believe they succeeded. I have not told anyone about what happened after we returned to Juneau. I have not even told the other members of the team, though I suspect some of them experienced similar things. But if I am going to tell this story completely, if I am going to give you the whole truth, then I need to share this part too. It was 3 days after our extraction. We were all staying in a hotel in Juneau, waiting to give our official statements and arrange our flights home. I was in my room, trying to sleep but failing, when I felt that familiar sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes to find my hotel room transformed. The walls were covered in frost, and that blue glow was emanating from every surface. And standing at the foot of my bed was one of them, the old man I had followed across the glacier, the one who had led me to the crevasse. He looked more solid now, more real. I could see the individual hairs of his beard, the patterns stitched into his furs, the deep lines around his eyes. He was still oriented wrong, standing at an angle that made my head hurt to look at, but he was undeniably there. He spoke, and though I did not understand the words, I understood the meaning. It was not language exactly, but a direct transfer of concepts and feelings into my mind. He showed me what had happened to his people. They had been living on the glacier for generations, following the great herds of animals that migrated with the seasons. They had their own understanding of the world, their own science that was different from ours but no less valid. They knew that ice was not just frozen water but a boundary between states of being, a place where different realities pressed close together. They had learned to navigate these boundaries, to walk in the spaces between. It gave them advantages in hunting, in survival. They could step sideways out of danger, could find game when others starved, but they knew it was dangerous. They knew the boundaries needed to be respected. Then came the event. He showed it to me, not in words, but in sensation. A star fell from the sky, burning bright, and struck the glacier with unimaginable force. But it was not a normal meteorite. It was something else, something from outside, from a place where the rules were different. The impact created a shockwave, not just physical but dimensional. It rippled through the boundaries his people had learned to navigate, tearing them open, scrambling the orientation of space itself. In an instant, up became down, left became right, forward became backward. His people were caught in multiple gravitational fields simultaneously, pulled in every direction at once. Most died instantly, frozen by the impossible cold that rushed in through the torn boundaries. But some, like him, persisted. They were trapped in that moment, unable to move forward or backward in time, existing in a state between life and death, between reality and something else. They have been there for 12,000 years, watching as the glacier slowly moved and shifted, as new peoples came and went, as the world changed around them while they remained frozen. They have been trying to communicate, trying to warn others away from the impact site, trying to prevent anyone else from suffering their fate. But we had drilled into the ice, we had taken samples, we had opened a connection between their frozen moment and our moving time. And now that connection existed, a bridge between their reality and ours. He showed me one final thing. The meteorite, or whatever it was still there. It was buried deep in the glacier, at the bottom of that crevasse, surrounded by the frozen settlement. And it was still active, still creating those dimensional distortions, still tearing holes in the fabric of space. Then he did something I did not expect. He reached out, his translucent hand passing through the layers of reality, and touched my forehead. The sensation was like ice water flooding my brain. For a moment, I could see everything from his perspective. I could see the world as he saw it, a place where multiple orientations of reality existed simultaneously, where up and down were meaningless concepts, where time moved in spirals instead of straight lines. I could see the other members of my team in their hotel rooms, each one receiving a similar visit, each one being shown the same truth. I could see the glacier itself, and the thousands of souls trapped within it, all existing in their own personal directions, all waiting for something that might never come. And I could see the future, fractured and uncertain, splitting into multiple possibilities. In some versions, the glacier melted and the meteorite was exposed, creating a catastrophic dimensional rupture that would tear apart the fabric of reality in the entire region. In other versions, the glacier remained frozen for centuries more, keeping the meteorite safely contained but trapping the souls within it for eternity. When the vision ended and he withdrew his hand, I was left with a single clear understanding. We were not supposed to leave the glacier. We were supposed to stay and become guardians, to join the upside-down walkers in their eternal watch, to make sure no one else disturbed the site. But we had left. We had abandoned our post. And now, the burden of that knowledge, the weight of that responsibility, was ours to carry for the rest of our lives. The old man faded from view, and my hotel room returned to normal, but I could still feel the cold touch on my forehead, and I knew that a part of me would forever remain on that glacier, walking in impossible directions, trapped between moments. I tried to go back. 3 months after returning home, I bought a plane ticket to Juneau and made arrangements to hire a guide to take me back to the glacier. But the night before my flight, I had another visit. This time it was not the old man, but a woman, younger, holding a child. She showed me what would happen if I returned. The connection we had opened was growing stronger with each passing day. If I went back, if any of us went back, we would not be able to leave again. We would be pulled into that frozen moment, trapped like they were trapped, adding 6 more souls to the thousands already imprisoned in the ice. She showed me an alternative. We could share the story. We could warn others. We could make sure that no one else drilled into that specific location, that no one else disturbed the meteorite. It was not the perfect solution, but it was the only one that allowed us to remain in our own reality, in our own proper orientation of time and space. So, that is what I am doing now. I am sharing this story, knowing that most people will dismiss it as fiction or delusion. But somewhere out there, someone will believe, someone will understand, and maybe, just maybe, they will help make sure that the glacier and its trapped inhabitants are left in peace. The research camp was never rebuilt. The area was quietly designated as off-limits for future expeditions, officially due to dangerous ice conditions. The drilling site was marked on maps with a warning label, though the reason for the warning was left deliberately vague. Our ice cores and samples were archived in a facility in Colorado, where they sit in cold storage, available for study but never actually studied. I still work in glaciology, though I focus now on satellite observation and remote sensing. I study glaciers from a distance, through computer screens and data readouts, never setting foot on the ice myself. My colleagues think I developed a phobia after the expedition, and I let them believe that. It is easier than trying to explain the truth. But every night, when I close my eyes, I can still see them. The upside-down walkers, pacing through their frozen moment, existing in directions that have no names. Sometimes they are far away, just shadows on the edge of perception. Other times they are close enough that I can see their faces, can almost understand what they are trying to tell me. Rebecca was right. They do visit my dreams, but they visit my waking hours too. I will be walking down a city street, and suddenly I will see one of them reflected in a window, standing at an impossible angle. I will be sitting in a coffee shop, and I will hear those footsteps, slow and methodical, walking on the ceiling above me. I will be driving on the highway, and I will catch a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, walking backward in time as I move forward. They are not haunting me, exactly. It is more like I have become aware of something that was always there, but that most people cannot see. The boundaries between realities, the places where different orientations of space and time press close together. Once you have walked in those spaces, once you have felt what it is like to exist in multiple directions simultaneously, you can never quite return to seeing the world in just 3 dimensions. Angela calls it the 4th dimensional awareness. She thinks that is what the old man gave us when he touched our foreheads, the ability to perceive reality as it actually is, rather than as our limited human senses normally present it. She thinks it is a gift, a glimpse of a larger truth, that humanity is not quite ready to understand. I am not sure if I would call it a gift. Most days, it feels more like a curse, but I have learned to live with it, to function despite the constant awareness of those other directions, those other possibilities. The hardest part is knowing that they are still there, still trapped, still waiting. 12,000 years have passed for us, but for them, it has been a single, eternal moment. They have been frozen in the instant of catastrophe, unable to move forward or back, unable to live or die properly. And there is nothing I can do to help them. Or is there? 6 months ago, Angela called me with a theory. She had been studying accounts of similar phenomena from around the world, disappearances, temporal anomalies, places where people reported experiencing impossible geometries. She had found patterns, connections that suggested this was not an isolated incident but part of something larger. She thinks the meteorite that struck the glacier was not alone. She thinks there were others, scattered across the world, each one creating its own pocket of broken reality. And she thinks that if we can find them, if we can map them and study them, we might be able to understand how to reverse the effect. It is a long shot. It might be impossible, but it is the first real hope we have had since leaving the glacier. We have started compiling data, reaching out quietly to other researchers who have encountered anomalies they could not explain. We are building a network, a group of people who have seen beyond the normal boundaries of reality and are trying to understand what we have seen. It is slow work, and it has to be done carefully. The last thing we want is to attract too much attention, to have governments or corporations decide that these dimensional rifts are resources to be exploited rather than dangers to be contained. We have all seen enough science fiction to know how that story ends, but we are making progress. We have identified at least 7 other sites around the world where similar events might have occurred. A cave system in Romania where explorers reported walking on the ceiling. A forest in Japan where hikers disappear and sometimes return days later with no memory of the lost time, or worse, with memories of walking in impossible directions. A lake in Siberia where the ice freezes in geometric patterns that should not exist in nature. Each site might contain its own population of trapped souls, its own version of the upside-down walkers, and each site might hold a clue to understanding how this happened and how it might be reversed. Last month, we got our first real breakthrough. Angela found a researcher in Iceland, a physicist named Henrik, who had been studying similar phenomena for years. He had developed a theoretical model for what he called gravitational inversion events, moments when the quantum foam that underlies space-time temporarily loses coherence, allowing different orientations of reality to merge. According to Henrik's model, these events are rare, but not impossible. They require a specific combination of factors: a high-energy impact, a location where the barriers between dimensions are already thin, and a catalyst, something that can trigger the quantum decoherence at just the right moment. The meteorite provided the impact and the catalyst. The glacier, with its ancient ice and its position at a geomagnetic junction point, provided the thin barrier. The result was a localized collapse of space-time geometry, creating a bubble where normal physical laws no longer applied. But here is the important part. Henrik's model also suggested a way to reverse the effect. If we could generate a precisely calibrated pulse of energy at the exact frequency of the quantum decoherence, we might be able to reset the bubble, allowing space-time to heal itself and releasing the trapped souls. It would require resources we do not have, equipment that does not exist yet, and permissions that would be impossible to obtain through official channels. But Angela thinks she has found a way. She has been in contact with a private technology company that specializes in exotic physics research. They are interested in Henrik's work, interested enough to potentially fund an expedition back to the glacier. The expedition would not happen for at least 2 more years. There are too many technical hurdles to overcome, too many questions that need to be answered first. But for the first time since we left that frozen hell, I feel something that might be hope. If we can do this, if we can free those trapped souls and close the dimensional rift, it will not erase what we experienced. It will not undo the nightmares or the constant awareness of those impossible directions, but it might give us some measure of peace, some sense that our discovery led to something good rather than just more suffering. I think about them often, those ancient people who lived and died in an instant of cosmic bad luck. They were not so different from us. They were trying to survive, to feed their families, to understand the world around them. They had hopes and fears and dreams, just like everyone else, but they made the mistake of living in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for that, they have paid the ultimate price. If we can help them, if we can give them the death they were denied 12,000 years ago, then maybe our own suffering will have been worth something. Maybe the burden of fourth-dimensional awareness that we carry will have served a purpose. But even if we cannot help them, even if Henrik's theory proves wrong or the expedition never happens, I will continue to share their story. Because they deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their tragedy acknowledged, their existence validated. They are not just anomalies or scientific curiosities. They were people, and they still are people, trapped in a moment that never ends, walking in directions that should not exist, waiting for a release that might never come. If you have made it this far in my story, I want to thank you for listening. I know it sounds impossible. I know it challenges everything we think we know about reality. But I also know that the world is stranger and more wonderful and more terrifying than we usually allow ourselves to believe. Before I finish, I want to share one more thing. A few weeks ago, I had another visit. Not from the old man or the woman with the child, but from someone new. A young person, maybe 20 years old, dressed in modern clothes. At first, I thought it was impossible, that all the upside-down walkers were from 12,000 years ago. But then I understood. The dimensional rift is still active. It is still trapping people. Not often, maybe not even once in a generation, but it happens. Someone gets too close to the glacier in just the wrong spot at just the wrong moment, and they slip through the boundary, becoming one of the trapped. This young person had been a hiker, exploring the glacier just 2 years ago. They had wandered away from their group, stepped on a seemingly solid section of ice, and suddenly found themselves existing in multiple directions at once, frozen in a moment that would never end. They wanted me to know that time was running out. The glacier is melting, retreating at an accelerating rate due to climate change. Within a decade, maybe less, the meteorite will be exposed, and when that happens, the dimensional rift will no longer be contained by the ice. It will expand, potentially growing large enough to engulf the entire region, trapping everyone within 100 miles in that same frozen moment. We need to act soon. We need to find a way to close the rift before the glacier melts away to nothing. Otherwise, the upside-down walkers will no longer be a small tragedy confined to a remote glacier in Alaska. They will be a catastrophe that could swallow thousands, maybe millions of people. That is why I am sharing this story now, despite the risk to my reputation and career. That is why I am breaking my silence after 3 years of trying to forget, trying to move on, trying to convince myself it was all just a shared delusion. Because it was not a delusion, it was real. It is real. And it is going to become everyone's problem if we do not do something about it. So please, if you know anyone who works in physics, in government, in any position where they might be able to help, share this story with them. If you have resources or connections that could assist in mounting an expedition to the glacier, reach out to me. If you have experienced anything similar, if you have seen the upside-down walkers in your own life, let me know that I am not alone in this. And if you are planning any trips to Alaska, any adventures on the glaciers, please be careful. Stay with your group. Do not wander into areas marked as off-limits. And if you ever feel that sensation, that pull toward a direction that should not exist, turn around and walk away as fast as you can. The upside-down walkers are still there, still waiting, still hoping for release. And the boundary between their reality and ours is growing thinner every day. I check the weather reports for Juneau every morning. I monitor the scientific papers about glacial retreat in Alaska. I stay in constant contact with Angela and the others from our team, comparing notes, sharing our experiences, trying to find a solution before it is too late. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if we are already too late. I wonder if the dimensional rift has already grown beyond the point where it can be contained. I wonder if we are just postponing the inevitable, if one day soon the entire world will slip sideways into impossible directions and we will all become upside-down walkers, frozen in an eternal moment, walking on ceilings and walls and the undersides of reality itself. But then I remember the old man's touch, the knowledge he transferred to me. He showed me multiple possible futures, and in some of them, we succeed. In some of them, we find a way to close the rift, to free the trapped souls, to restore the proper flow of time and space. Those possibilities exist. They are real, just as real as the darker futures where everything falls apart. And as long as they exist, as long as there is even a chance of success, I have to keep trying. We all do. If you have enjoyed this story, or if it has made you think about the world in new ways, I would be grateful if you would like, subscribe, and share this video. The more people who hear about the upside-down walkers, The more people who understand what is happening on that glacier in Alaska, the better our chances of finding a solution before it is too late. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing, or at least for suspending your disbelief long enough to hear me out. And if you ever find yourself walking on ice, in a cave, in a forest, or anywhere else where reality feels thin, remember the upside-down walkers. Remember that there are boundaries between worlds, and sometimes those boundaries can be crossed. Remember that the universe is stranger than we imagine, stranger than we can imagine. And remember that there are people trapped in impossible places, waiting for help that may never come, unless we decide to help them. That is my story. That is the truth about what happened at the Mendenhall Glacier Research Camp, about the footprints inside the ice, about the upside-down walkers who still haunt my dreams and my waking hours. I do not expect everyone to believe me. I do not even need everyone to believe me. I just need enough people to take it seriously, to investigate, to help us find a solution before the glacier melts and the dimensional rift expands beyond containment. Because this is not just about 6 researchers who had a terrifying experience 3 years ago. This is about 12,000 years of suffering that needs to end. This is about preventing a catastrophe that could trap thousands or millions more in the same frozen moment. This is about saving the world from walking upside down forever. My name is Owen. I am 27 years old. I worked at a glacier research camp in Alaska, and I discovered footprints inside the ice. Those footprints changed my life, opened my eyes to aspects of reality I never knew existed, and gave me a mission that I will pursue for the rest of my days. I am a guardian now, whether I wanted to be or not. A guardian of the boundary between realities, a keeper of the knowledge about the upside-down walkers, a voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And I will not rest, will not stop, will not give up until those trapped souls are finally free. That is my promise to them. That is my promise to you. And that is why I am sharing this story, despite the personal cost, despite the ridicule and disbelief I know it will bring, because some truths are too important to keep silent. The upside-down walkers are real, the dimensional rift is real, the danger is real, and the time to act is running out. Thank you for listening. And please, be careful where you walk.